We welcome you back into the Talmid as we continue our study here in the book of John and BI 100, the Gospel of John. We continue to look at verses 1 through 5, and today we come to the end of verse 5. And then in our next session, we begin section 6 through 8, verses 6 through 8. But let us return here because this section is as crucial as the previous lesson that we had. Now let's come back and look at the whole context before we drive in and we focus in on verse 5. Now remember that Jesus is the living word. He's being presented to us as the living word, and the first witness of John the Apostle. John the Apostle is giving testimony to who Christ is. And as he reveals Christ, what we discover is that Christ is revealing God the Father to us simultaneously. In our next section, verses 6 to 8, we're going to be looking at John the Baptist, the role that John the Baptist plays. But this starts out at first in the first 5 verses with John the Apostle. So let's not get them confused. Let's go right into the text and begin to drive in. Now, in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being." Then look at verse 4. He says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men." And now we drive into verse 5. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." So remember, for our last 3 classes, we were looking at contrasting light and darkness, because this is exactly what John the Apostle does here. Now, most unfortunately, what we find with verse 5, when he comes to the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Unfortunately, this verse tends to be just overlooked, superficially treated, and we really don't understand the depth and the breadth and the profundity, the gravity, okay, and the amplitude of what this verse is really talking about. Because remember that John comes out of the starting blocks, okay, of this book, the Gospel of John, making it clear that Jesus Christ is God. He was in the beginning, he was with God, and he is God. Now, if you recall, I said to you, as we come to the conclusion of the first introductions of the first 5 verses, which is the introduction to the Gospel of John, I said that John was continuing to present his case that Christ is God by speaking about 3 things specifically. That one, Christ, okay, we talked about the power of the Creator, and then we talked about the possession of Christ, and now in the last session and this session, as we come to this end, it was talking about the poor understanding of the unregenerate man. The poor understanding of the unregenerate man. Now, this is crucial because the world hasn't done anything new in the last 2,000 years since the birth of Christ. We know that. And since the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ, the world hasn't done anything new. Now, it may have repackaged everything that it does, but there's absolutely nothing new here. And my wife always says there's nothing new under the sun. She quotes the scriptures a lot about that issue. Now, when we talked in our last session, we said that in verse 5, we looked at, if you remember, we looked at the New American Standard Version of the Bible. We looked at the King James Version of the Bible, where it says, "In the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth not." Well, men embrace today, and it's been around for quite some time. Men embrace evolution. You know why? Because the only other alternative is creation by God. And they're not willing to accept that. So they're not willing to accept creation, okay? Or they're not willing to accept the God whom they have to give an accountability. So what they're going to embrace evolution. Now, let's also be honest. Even though evolution seems to be the primary thought that is projected to us, that is communicated to us, that is proclaimed to us, especially through the educational system, especially through the news media, especially through entertainment, movies, television, and so forth, okay? But let's also be honest. There's another side to the story. Many do not accept this truth. Many do not accept this truth with regard to evolution. Now, what does evolution have to do with verse 5? Everything. Look what he says. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." Look, guesses and speculations are framed That is the overwhelming foundation of evolution. Guesses and speculations are framed to sustain evolutionary beliefs. And this is what I want to drive into in this text when he says, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now, if you recall, I also said to you in several classes ago, and that was that we need to also come out of the ivory tower or the academic tower, and we have to come down to the brass tacks and at a level where we actually live, what we're actually experiencing on this earth. And evolution is the wildfire that has consumed the minds of a lot of our young people and of our professors. Look, it's nothing new. You know, when I was in junior high school, and that was in the 70s. Okay, no, sorry, it was in the late 60s. It was in the 60s when I was in junior high school. Okay, and evolution was the primary thing that was being taught in our classes. I remember that very distinctly. So this isn't anything that is something new. And we're talking about more than 50 years ago. So this isn't anything new. However, it gets a little more slick. It has a greater presentation. It's better articulated. It is more eloquent in its language. It's very impressive with the graphs and the charts and the PowerPoint presentations and the movies that have been made. But nevertheless, the majority of it is built on guesses and speculations, which is what is sustaining the evolutionary beliefs. Now, I want to talk to you about the most famous person. This is Darwin. Now, before I open my mouth on the rest of this, you should know I have spent some time studying this issue and researching it. Because it is ironic that the beliefs of evolutionists today were doubted by Charles Darwin himself yesterday. Did you hear what I just said? It is ironic that the evolutionists today, the beliefs of the evolutionists today were doubted by Charles Darwin himself yesterday. Now let's stay with the verse. He says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And I want to share some information with you because it's really crucial that you understand. Because this is a classic example of this verse. It is a classic example of this verse. When he says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. The light of God shines into the darkness. The sun shines into the darkness. And yet creation shines into the darkness, and it still cannot comprehend it. So let me close this section, verse 5, with a basic understanding of what's wrong. And here's the irony about it. We're now discovering in Bible schools, Bible institutes, in seminary, where now you're finding in many places, and in the churches, where evolution has now been elevated to the level of creation. And it's left to the congregation, it's left to the members to make a decision. Look, so I want to share the issues with Darwin because he's the single most influential individual, but yet to be an evolutionist, you have to lie. Yes, you heard what I said. You have to misrepresent the truth. You have to outright lie. What Charles Darwin also said. Look, in Charles Darwin, he wrote a book, and the book is called The Original Origin of the Species. The Original Origin of the Species in 1859. In 1859. Okay? Now, 100 years later, 110 years later, I'm in junior high school, and this book was required reading in one of our classes. The original origin of the species, which Darwin wrote in 1859. Now, Darwin openly acknowledged the necessity of God, yet evolutionists do not present that part of him. Few people realized the extent of Darwin's own doubts. Darwin had doubts over his own theory, a theory which he confessed was grievously hypothetical. He made this very clear. Now, this was recorded. Darwin wrote a letter to Asa Gray in November 29th in 1859, where he laid out in detail, okay, why he believed that his theory was purely hypothetical, and he even had doubts about his own theory. Now, in order for the evolutionists to wage war against creation and wage war against God, they had to keep this letter and a lot of his other writings hidden. Look, Darwin had to wrestle. As he wrestled over his doubts, Darwin suffered because of his belief system. He did. He suffered physically. Charles Darwin suffered mentally, and he suffered spiritually. In fact, do you know that Darwin admitted he could not find no real evidence for his own theory? This was absolutely amazing, but yet you do not hear that. Okay? Now, if you go back to that book, and that's called The Original Origin of the Species, which is written in 1859. Now, can you imagine? But 110 years later, I'm in junior high school, okay, and we're reading this book. And what I did find interesting, because I remember our teacher at that time focused in on, because our teacher was also struggling with the idea of evolution and creation and was moving toward evolution as the truth, capital THE, the truth. And he openly confessed that he was struggling with this idea as he underscored the following pages of that book, The Original Origins of the Species by Charles Darwin in 1859. And he specifically drew our attention to page 205 of that book, page 230 of that book, page 123 of that book, page 227 of that book, page 292 of that book, and page 453 of that book, in which Charles Darwin himself, admitted that he could find no real evidence for his own theory. So he came up with the theory, and now he had to find the facts to support that theory, rather than finding the facts that were unexplainable at the beginning and then develop a theory. Charles Darwin did it completely the opposite. And now, if that's not only troubling to you, now remember the verse. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not understand it, did not comprehend it. In fact, do you know that most of the scientists, if you look at their writings very, very carefully, in fact, much of this is now available on the internet and the Wild World Web. You can now research this on your own, okay? But most of the scientists in Darwin's day, when Darwin was a scientist researching on his day, okay, could not accept his theory on scientific grounds. Do you know that most of the scientists on his counterparts in his day could not accept his theory on scientific grounds? They could not see the evidence for what he was saying. They could not see it. And most of them rejected it. This is the irony that you don't hear about. Again, the light shines in the darkness, John chapter 1, verse 5, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Look. Now, let's fast forward to today. The scientists today proclaim the same message of wastefulness and destructiveness of evolution, because evolution has been, that theory has been wasteful and absolutely destructive. So I'm going to quote for you, okay? Let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 major scientists, okay, who have made some profound statements, and as a result, okay, has really created the stir within the evolutionary community. But the news media has kept it pretty quiet. Take, for example, Dr. A.E. Wilder. A.E. Wilder, W-I-L-D-E-R. Dr. A.E. Wilder Smith. This is what he said with regard, and he's a renowned scientist. This is what he said with regard to Darwin. He said, the dead hand of Darwinism has weighed heavily on the scientific progress for over 100 years. The dead hand of Darwinism has been so heavy on scientific progress, okay, that progress has not been made. Take Dr. Dmitry Kuzistusson. And Kuzistusson, he was a Russian biochemist, world-renowned Russian biochemist. Now, Dmitry has earned 3 doctorates in science. He observed that in Russia, And he made this very clear. Scientists become believers in creation on scientific grounds. Did you hear what I just said? Scientists become believers in creation on scientific grounds, noting that the evolutionists are very subjective in which data they decide to use as the evidence for their theories. They will not look at all the facts or evidence. When I was a little boy, my father made a statement, it was so long ago, but it stuck in my head. He said, son, figures don't lie, but liars can figure. In other words, you can figure out and you can manipulate the numbers to say anything that you want. Then take Dr. Nilsson, Nilsson, Dr. Nilsson, Nilsson, look him up. He said, after 40 years of scientific research that attempted to prove evolution, he concluded, because he was a devout evolutionist, he spent 40 years of his life in scientific research attempting to prove evolution, and he concluded that his time had been thoroughly wasted. He had wasted an entire lifetime, 40 years. He stated that this theory, evolution, should be entirely abandoned as a serious obstruction to true biological research. Then let's take Dr. Louis Bonheur. In Bonheur, his last name is Bounnoure. And Bonheur, he's another world famous French scientist. He is the director of research at France's National Center of Scientific Research. And this is what he stated, quote unquote, evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. The theory has helped nothing in the progress of science. It is useless. Why? It ignores the truth and it is without God. It's absolutely incredible. And yet you will not hear the public media talk about this. This is the reason why John said in John chapter 1 verse 5, he said, the light shines in the darkness and the darkness did not comprehend it. The light shines in the darkness and the darkness did not comprehend it. Look, now, do you realize that there are a lot of modern scientists? They're rethinking and reconsidering God as their creator. This is what's absolutely amazing. They're rethinking and reconsidering God as the creator. Why? Because the evidence is drawing them to that position. For example, if you took the book Cosmos, Bios, and Theos, it's Cosmo, Bios, and Theos. That's the name of the book. Okay, it's produced by 60 world-class scientists from around the world. 60 world-class scientists, of which 24 of them are Nobel Prize winners. I would encourage, buy the book, read the book, okay? Because this is where John chapter 1 verse 5 just explodes out. It's like a neon sign. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Look, and their spokesperson was the name of Henry Margenau. And Margenau, Margenaw, and Margenau is a Yale University physicist. And this is how he reasons. And he made this statement at the convention of different scientists that he went to. And this is what, let me read the quote for you. There is only one convincing answer to explain the intricate complexities and the laws of the universe. Creation by omniscient, omnipotent God. Did you hear that? This is at a worldwide conference of scientists. He said there's only one convincing answer to explain the intricate complexities and the laws of the universe. Creation by an omniscient, omnipotent God. You see, if we're honest, when we read that verse in John chapter 1 verse 5, he says, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Evolution has damaged not only science, because the overwhelming majority of honest scientists will tell you that evolution has damaged science, but also it has damaged society, and life has been completely cheapened by this theory. See, God is the only one who gives value to life. He's the only one qualified to give value to life. Now, there's a gentleman by Sir Arthur Keith. Sir Arthur Keith, Keith. Sir Arthur Keith. He was an evolutionist, and he's the author of the book Evolution and Ethics. Evolution and Ethics. And he concludes that evolution weakens the ethics of people. Now, this is what he makes it. See, the ways of the natural evolution, and he makes a statement that the ways of natural evolution are cruel, brutal, ruthless, and without mercy. Because that's evolution. It's cruel, brutal, ruthless, and without mercy. Now, the evolution of Germany. Now, let me fast forward. Let's rewind the tape back. If you go back to World War II and prior to World War II, okay, and I realize that we're so far separated from that experience. I understand that. But if you go back, okay, to that period, the evolution of Germany as a master race was prompted by Adolf Hitler to drench literally Europe in blood. How? By slaughtering Jews, by slaughtering the sick, by slaughtering, killing the weak, and those who were handicapped, and to begin breeding babies with a perfect Aryan couples. Do you know how Hitler got there? Hitler had little value for life. He had a survival of the fittest mentality because in his Roman Catholic background teaching, evolution had been incorporated into his theology. Look, in John chapter 1, verse 5, again, he says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now, let me take you one step further. Okay? Recently, there was a movie on television, and my wife was watching. It's called Lucy. Lucy, L-U-S-Y. Lucy. It's a well-known TV movie, okay, which really retraces the steps of evolution all the way back. Okay. Well, I do recall, here again, on another flight, talking to somebody who was a scientist, sitting next to me, and he began to talk about the Neanderthal man, and he talked about the Peking man, he talked about all this, okay? Well, I remember when I was in college, okay? And this is in the early 70s, when I was in college, and I do remember studying the subject, but I couldn't remember all the details, so I decided to go back and research it and dig it out for myself again, knowing that I was going to come down to John chapter 1, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Look, some people may ask, well, what about all of the evidence of the bones of different men that have been found? Now, this is where everything is built on guesses and speculation. Guesses and speculation. All right, so let's look at all of those bones. Let's take first the Neanderthal man, right? You remember they have all the charts, and they got this, and they got the little charts, okay, and the bodies go up this way, and then they go up, and then they get really big, and then they get big, and then they go way, way down, okay? Well, the Neanderthal man, okay? And we've seen all kinds of movies and books that have been written about, and this has been taught widely as true. Look, the Neanderthal man, he was not a man. Recent DNA. Now, you have to understand, they can say that they can carbon date something, okay, 1,000,000 years back. They say that they have tests. They have scientific procedures to prove that they're correct. Now, using their own procedures, recent DNA tests show that the chromosomes do not match humans, but apes. Mum's the word. Now they don't want to talk about that anymore. The Neanderthal man. Then there was another one called the Piltdown man. The Piltdown man. Piltdown. Piltdown. The Piltdown man. Now this was literally a deliberate hoax. This was the classic fake news. Right? A jaw of an ape was attached to a human skull and was stained to look old. This was the Piltdown man. Right? They finally disproved that. So now we can disprove the Neanderthal man. We can disprove the Piltdown man. And then there's the Peking man. The Peking man, like in Peking, China. Peking, P-E-K-I-N-G. Okay? Now, and this is what it's built on. The tools in human bones were found near the apes whose brains they were eating. That was the Peking man. Really? Well, they built a whole theory on this thing, okay? A whole scientific theory on it. The problem is that monkey brains are still being eaten in China. Mm-hmm. So they had to kind of do away with that slowly and discreetly. Then there's called the Nebraska man. You know, as in Nebraska, the USA, the Nebraska man, Nebraska. So the Nebraska man. And here's what it is. An entire person and family, listen to him, and go back and read it for yourself. An entire person and family was envisioned from a single tooth. From a single tooth. A tooth that proved to come from a pig when more research was done. So we have the Neanderthal man, we have the Piltdown man, we have the Peking man, and we have the Nebraska man. And now we finally come to Lucy. Now Lucy, this was reclassified after much research by scientists themselves, was reclassified as an extinct ape. An extinct ape. There is no way of tracing back the DNA of this extinct ape. It's extinct. That's evolution. It's built on guesses and speculations, highly destructive. Listen, evolutions, okay, not only deny the truth of Scripture, but they deny the truth of science. This is what the irony of all this is. Well, let's go to the Big Bang Theory, okay? The light shines in the darkness in John chapter 1, verse 5, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now, if you just follow along the scientific language that is used, okay, there's something called the first law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics, okay? And this is what it states. It states that the energy or matter cannot be created or destroyed. Energy, matter cannot be created. Did you hear that? And cannot be destroyed. Now, scientists agree to that. It cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. And yet they tell you that energy, boom, two atoms somewhere in the universe collided and created energy. But that's what they tell you. Okay? Now, however, existing energy and matter, it can be converted from one form to another. Now, we've proven that over and over, and that's true. Right? Now, the Big Bang Theory runs into a snag with this law because it's saying that it created itself. That there is no omniscient, omnipotent, there is no intelligent, higher mind above that did this. So even by their own law, which they deny, and this is where scientists are now getting pretty ugly and arguing with each other. Now we come to the question. Where did the original matter and energy come from? Well, evolution has no answer. They have no answer. None. Some say it was just, some just say it just was. It just happened. Now, they pride themselves on evidence, when truly it's guesses and speculations. Our answer is that God put the universe into motion. Evolution states that man and the world are getting better and that order came from chaos by chance. Really? Beloved, order does not come from chaos. Explosions produce chaos. Then there's the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics states that life deteriorates. This is by scientists. Every system left to itself goes from order to disorder or decay. Everything runs down eventually. It just runs down eventually. The world is not getting better. It's running down. Now, fools reject truth. They reject God who holds the universe together. Now, go back to Colossians chapter 1. And in Colossians chapter 1, it says in verse 16 and 17, as we come to a close here. Look at this very carefully. It says, for by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth. This is God. Visible and invisible. This is God. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, this is God. All things have been created through him, for him. This is God. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. this is God. Now, if you really follow through on what they're trying to tell you, and even scientists say this, okay, that this cannot be. So this had to have, there had to have been an intelligent, omniscient, omnipotent God to put this together. Because according to the scientists, the earth is a delicate balance, protected and maintained, okay? They go, we don't know. We say by God. See, life could not exist if any of the following situations were true. Life could not exist if any of the following situations were true. Look, this is why they're in a state of panic about global warming. Look, let me share some truths to you that even scientists admit. Number one, a slower or faster rotation of the earth, right, than the earth, okay, could not exist. If it went faster or slower down, it's perfectly balanced. Number two, the earth, if the earth was 2 to 5% closer or further from the sun, if it's 2 to 5% closer or further from the sun, the earth could not exist. 3, if there was 1% change in the sunlight, if there was a 1% change in the sun, by their definition, the earth could not exist. So much for global warming, right? 4, if the earth or the moon was smaller or larger, the earth could not exist. Number 5, if the earth was more than, if there was more than one moon, right, around the earth could not exist. Number 6, if the earth's crust, if it was thicker or thinner, the earth could not exist. Number 7, if the oxygen and the nitrogen ratio was greater or less, the earth could not exist. So much for cutting down all the forests and going green. See, men can persist in rejecting God's truth. The truth, however, still remains and is not altered by men's objections and their pessimism. That's the reason why I tell you, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. We'll pick this up in our next section, verses 6 to 8, John chapter 1.